The handwritten note arrived on Tuesday afternoon, delivered by courier to my downtown office. I recognized Mom's elegant script immediately, the same careful penmanship she'd used to write my name on lunch boxes and birthday cards when I was young, back when I was still considered part of the family. Caroline. Your father and I have decided it would be best if you don't attend our 25th anniversary celebration this Saturday. We don't want you to ruin our special day with your presence or your choices. We hope you understand. Regards, Mother. I read it twice, each word cutting deeper than the last. 29 years old, and my mother could still reduce me to feeling like a disappointed child with a few sentences on expensive stationery. My assistant knocked and entered my corner office on the 42nd floor of downtown's most prestigious building. Ms. Whitmore? Your 3 p.m. is here. I folded the note and slipped it into my desk drawer. Send them in, Janet. But my mind wasn't on the merger discussion that followed or the acquisition proposal after that, or any of the other business that typically consumed my days as CEO of Meridian Capital. Instead, I kept thinking about that phrase, ruin our special day with your presence. As if my mere existence was somehow toxic to their happiness. The anniversary party was being held at Oakmont Country Club, where my family had been members for 15 years. It was the same place where I'd learned to play tennis, where I'd attended countless charity galas and society events, where I'd first fallen in love with business by watching the wealthy elite network and make deals over cocktails and caviar. It was also the place where I'd been publicly disinherited 3 years ago, when I'd refused to marry Bradley Ashworth and had instead announced my intention to expand my company internationally. She's chosen business over family, Dad had declared to anyone who would listen. We raised her to be a proper young woman, and she's decided to be a corporate shark instead. The irony wasn't lost on me. The corporate shark, they were so ashamed of, had built a portfolio worth $2.7 billion while they'd been planning garden parties and charity luncheons. At 5 p.m. I called my lawyer. David, remember that proposal from Charles Hartwell about selling Oakmont Country Club? The one you turned down 6 months ago? He was asking $47 million for the property and membership roster. Is the offer still on the table? As far as I know. Why? I want to buy it. Caroline, that's a significant investment for what amounts to a hobby property. It's not a hobby, David. It's leverage. I hung up and immediately called Charles Hartwell myself. At 73, he'd been running Oakmont for 2 decades, but his children had no interest in the club business, and he'd been quietly looking for the right buyer. Mr. Hartwell, this is Caroline Whitmore. I'd like to discuss your offer. Caroline, wonderful to hear from you. I was wondering if you'd reconsider. I'm prepared to pay $50 million for a quick closing. Cash. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When you say quick, I need to close by Saturday morning. This Saturday? Caroline, that's 4 days away. I have my lawyers standing by and I can wire the funds immediately upon signing. Are you interested? Another pause, longer this time. May I ask why the rush? Let's just say I have a personal interest in being able to make some changes to Saturday's event schedule. Charles chuckled. Well, if you can have the paperwork ready by Friday afternoon, we have a deal. I spent the next 3 days in a frenzy of legal documentation, financial transfers, and property assessments. My legal team worked around the clock to expedite what normally would have been a months-long process. By Friday evening, I owned Oakmont Country Club. Saturday morning, I arrived at the club at 8 a.m. to meet with the staff and review the day's event schedule. The anniversary party was set for 7 p.m. in the Grand Ballroom, with 150 guests expected to celebrate Richard and Patricia Whitmore's silver anniversary. Ms. Whitmore, said Margaret Chin, the club's event coordinator, we're so excited to have you as our new owner. Mr. Hartwell briefed us on the transition, but we weren't expecting to meet you so soon. I wanted to review tonight's events personally. Margaret consulted her clipboard. We have the Whitmore anniversary celebration in the Grand Ballroom. It's one of our largest events this year. They've spared no expense. I'm sure they have. Tell me about the guest list. 150 attendees, including several city council members, the hospital board of directors, and most of the prominent families from Riverside Heights. All the people who mattered in my parents' social circle. All the people who'd watched my public humiliation 3 years ago. All the people who'd heard countless stories about Richard and Patricia's disappointing daughter who'd chosen money over marriage. Margaret, I'm afraid I need to make some changes to tonight's schedule. Changes? The anniversary party is cancelled. Margaret's face went white. Cancelled? But Ms. Whitmore, we've been planning this for months. The catering, the flowers, the orchestra. Will all be compensated, of course. But the event cannot proceed as scheduled. May I ask why? I looked out the window at the perfectly manicured golf course, the tennis courts where I'd spent countless summer afternoons, the swimming pool where I'd learned to dive. This place had been my second home for 15 years, until it became the site of my exile. Because the hosts are no longer welcome at this club. Margaret looked confused and distressed. I don't understand. Effective immediately, Richard and Patricia Whitmore's membership is terminated. But they've been members for 15 years. And I've been their daughter for 29 years. Sometimes relationships change. I spent the afternoon at the club, familiarizing myself with operations and making strategic decisions about future improvements. At 6 p.m. I positioned myself in the main lobby, where arriving guests would have to pass by me to reach the grand ballroom. The first guests began arriving at 6:30. I recognized them all, the Ashworths, the Pendletons, the Harringtons. They passed by me without recognition, chatting excitedly about the celebration ahead. At 6:45 my parents arrived. Mom was radiant in a designer cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Dad looked distinguished in his custom tuxedo, every inch the successful investment banker who'd built a respected career and social position. They were the picture of established wealth and social grace, exactly the kind of couple that belonged at a place like Oakmont. Caroline, Mom said when she spotted me, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and displeasure. What are you doing here? Hello, Mother. Father. You both look lovely. You shouldn't be here, Dad said firmly. We made our wishes very clear. You did indeed. You said you didn't want me to ruin your special day with my presence. Exactly. So why are you here? I smiled and gestured toward the elegant lobby around us. Because I thought you should know that there's been a change in tonight's plans. What kind of change? Mom asked suspiciously. Before I could answer, Margaret appeared at my side, looking deeply uncomfortable. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, she said hesitantly, I'm afraid I have some difficult news about tonight's event. What news? Dad demanded. Margaret glanced at me nervously. The anniversary party has been cancelled. The silence that followed was profound. I could see other guests beginning to notice the commotion in the lobby. Cancelled. Mom repeated, her voice rising. That's impossible. We've planned this for months. I'm afraid it's not impossible, I said calmly. The new management has decided that tonight's event cannot proceed as scheduled. New management? Dad asked. That would be me, I replied. I bought Oakmont Country Club yesterday. The color drained from both their faces simultaneously. You what? Mom whispered. I purchased the club. $50 million cash. The transaction closed this morning. Dad was staring at me like I'd announced I was an alien from Mars. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. Don't I? Caroline, Mom said desperately, this is our anniversary party. Our friends are here, everything is prepared. And yet, as the new owner, I've decided to terminate your membership effective immediately. The guests in the lobby had stopped pretending not to listen. The Ashworths were openly staring, the Pendletons were whispering frantically to each other, and Judge Harrison was looking back and forth between my parents and me like he was watching a tennis match. You can't do this, Dad said, his voice tight with rage and embarrassment. Actually, I can. Property ownership has its privileges. Margaret cleared her throat. If I may suggest, perhaps we could reschedule the event for another date. I'm afraid that won't be possible, I said. The former member's privileges have been permanently revoked. Mom was crying now, her perfect makeup beginning to run. Caroline, please. Whatever we did to upset you, we can work it out. Can we? Because 3 days ago you sent me a note saying you didn't want me to ruin your special day with my presence. I'm simply honoring your wishes. We didn't mean. Yes, you did. You meant every word. Just like you meant it 3 years ago when you publicly disowned me for choosing my career over marriage. Just like you've meant every snide comment and disappointed look and concerned conversation about my life choices since then. The lobby had filled with confused guests, all of them trying to understand why their hosts were arguing with a young woman in a business suit. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, raising my voice so everyone could hear, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about tonight's event." Every conversation stopped. "I'm Caroline Whitmore, the new owner of Oakmont Country Club. Due to unforeseen circumstances, tonight's anniversary celebration has been cancelled." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. "However," I continued, "the club is pleased to offer all guests full use of our dining facilities this evening. Dinner will be complimentary, courtesy of the new management." The murmur grew louder as people tried to process what they were hearing. "Mom, Dad," I said, turning back to my parents, "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave the premises." "This is insane," Dad said. "You can't humiliate us like this." "Can't I? Because it seems to me that humiliation is something of a family tradition." Mrs. Ashworth approached our group, her face a mask of barely concealed fascination. "Caroline, dear, I had no idea you were involved with the club." "I'm not involved with it, Mrs. Ashworth. I own it." "Own it?" "As of yesterday, yes. Meridian Capital acquired the property as part of our hospitality portfolio expansion." The lie came easily. Meridian Capital did own hospitality properties, though this particular acquisition was purely personal. "Meridian Capital?" Judge Harrison had joined the conversation now. "The investment firm?" "That's correct. But you work there as?" "I founded it. I'm the CEO." The silence that followed was even more profound than before. "You're the head of Meridian Capital?" Mrs. Pendleton asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Founder and CEO, yes." I watched the mental calculations happening on faces throughout the lobby. Meridian Capital was one of the most successful investment firms in the region, known for turning small companies into industry leaders and making millionaires out of anyone smart enough to get in early. "The company worth billions?" Dad asked weakly. $2.7 billion in assets under management as of last quarter. Mom sat down heavily on the nearest chair, looking like she might faint. "But you never said." She began. "I tried to. Every family dinner, every holiday, every awkward conversation where you asked what I was really doing with my life. But you'd already decided that I was wasting my potential, and nothing I said seemed to change that narrative." "We thought you were working at an investment firm," Dad protested. "I was. The one I built from nothing while you were telling everyone how disappointed you were in my choices." Mrs. Ashworth was staring at me with new eyes. "Caroline, my husband's been trying to get a meeting with Meridian Capital for months." "Has he?" "You should have mentioned that at one of the many social events where you pointedly didn't speak to me because I was the family disappointment." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. "We never treated you that way," Mom said desperately. "Didn't you? Because 3 years ago at the Henderson Charity Gala, you introduced me to the Austrian ambassador as our daughter who hasn't quite figured out what she wants to do with her life. At the time, I just closed a deal worth $47 million. I could see the memory dawning on Mom's face. And last Christmas, when Uncle Robert asked about my work, Dad explained that I was playing around with investments while I should be focusing on finding a husband. That same week, Forbes had featured Meridian Capital on their cover as one of the fastest-growing firms in the country. Dad's face was cycling through every shade of red in the spectrum. 6 months ago at your birthday party, Mom, you told Mrs. Patterson that you were worried I'd never amount to anything because I was too focused on making money instead of making a family. The next morning, I donated $5 million to the Children's Hospital, anonymously because I knew you'd find a way to be embarrassed by that too. The lobby had gone completely silent except for the sound of Mom crying. "Caroline," she whispered, "we didn't know. You didn't want to know. It was easier to be disappointed in me than to consider that maybe I was succeeding in ways you didn't understand." Judge Harrison stepped forward. "Caroline, I think we all owe you an apology. We had no idea. You had no idea because you never bothered to look past your assumptions. Just like my parents, you saw what you expected to see instead of what was actually there." I looked around the lobby at all these people who'd dismissed me, ignored me, treated me like an embarrassment to my successful family. "The thing is," I continued, "I've spent the last 6 years building something extraordinary while all of you were convinced I was failing. I've created jobs for hundreds of people, generated wealth for thousands of investors, and contributed millions to charitable causes. We're so proud of you," Mom said through her tears. Are you? Or are you proud of the money? The question hung between us like a bridge none of us was sure we could cross. Both, Dad admitted quietly. I'm seeing both. It was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. At least you're being truthful. Margaret had been standing quietly during this entire exchange, but now she stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Ms. Whitmore, what should I tell the catering staff about dinner service? Serve dinner as planned. Everyone except the former Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore are welcome to stay and enjoy the evening. Caroline, please, Mom begged. Don't do this. We can work this out. Can we? Because I've been trying to work this out for years. Every time I tried to share my successes with you, you found ways to diminish them. Every time I tried to explain my vision, you offered suggestions for more realistic career paths. We were trying to protect you, Dad said. From what? From failure. From disappointment. From choosing a path that might not work out. Dad, I'm 29 years old. I've built a billion-dollar company. I employ 300 people. I've been featured in national magazines and invited to speak at conferences around the world. At what point do you stop protecting me from failure and start celebrating my success? He couldn't answer because there was no good answer. I need you both to leave now, I said gently. Security will escort you to your car. Caroline, Mom said one last time, we love you. I love you too. But love isn't enough anymore. I need respect. I need to be seen for who I actually am, not who you wish I was or who you're afraid I'm becoming. As security escorted my parents from the building, I turned to address the remaining guests. Ladies and gentlemen, the dining room is open and tonight's dinner is complimentary. I hope you'll consider this an opportunity to celebrate new beginnings. Mrs. Ashworth approached me as the crowd began to disperse. Caroline, I hope you'll forgive us for not recognizing your achievements sooner. There's nothing to forgive, Mrs. Ashworth. You saw what my parents showed you. What will happen now? With your family? I looked out the window at the golf course where I'd learned to play, the tennis courts where I'd spent countless afternoons, the swimming pool where I'd discovered my love of competition. I don't know. That depends on whether they can learn to see me as I am, instead of as they think I should be. And the club will continue operating as usual, though we'll be implementing some changes to ensure all members feel valued and respected. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd bought a country club to make a point about respect and now I actually had to run it. But as I watched the remaining guests settle into the dining room for an evening of excellent food and wine, I realized this might turn out to be one of my better investments. The next morning I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most were from my parents, but several were from other family members, friends, and even business contacts who'd somehow heard about the previous night's events. The most interesting message was from Uncle Robert. Caroline, I had no idea about your company. Can we talk? I think I owe you a very large apology. But it was the final text sent at 6 a.m. that made me pause. Dad, I drove by the club this morning and saw you in the office. You were there early working hard just like you always have. I realize now that I never really saw you before. I'd like to learn how. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Then let's start with coffee. But Dad, I need you to see me as I am, not as you think I should be. His response came immediately. I'm ready to try. 3 months later, Dad started consulting for Meridian Capital on real estate investments. Not because he needed the work, but because he wanted to understand the daughter who'd built something extraordinary while he wasn't paying attention. Mom joined the club's charity committee and helped organize a fundraiser that raised $200,000 for the Children's Hospital. And every Sunday we had family dinner at Oakmont Country Club, where I was finally seen not as the disappointing daughter, but as the woman who'd bought her way back into her own family. Respect, it turned out, was the one thing money actually could buy, if you were willing to pay the right price. A year later, my parents threw me a birthday party at the club. Instead of apologizing for my presence, Dad introduced me to everyone as my daughter Caroline, who taught me that success comes in many forms, and that the most important form is being true to yourself. It was the best gift he'd ever given me. And it hadn't cost him a dime.